Firstly, Afrei Lechem Tu B'Shvat to everybody. Chag HaYilonot, holiday of trees. A celebration. Actually, maybe I'll share some ideas later on. But before that, we continue in chapter 21. Chapter 21 in one word, Hayichud. We're speaking about unity, God's unity. And today we're going to see what it means, cognitive dissonance, which we'll explain a bit later. But what did we explain? God creates the world through a word. One word, several words. From one word becomes several words. Bereshis is the general word that all of things come into being. And then each 9 others, let there be light, and let the sun hang in its position. All these are details on the forthcoming days. But the important thing is, it's the concept of God communicating His speech, His word. Now, of course, whenever we understand anything, we can only understand it from the human condition. We have to be careful not to make that God's condition. And that's the trick over here. Because when we speak about speech, there are 2 things in human speech. There is the fact that what you want to do with speech is reveal, right? And what happens with speech? You reveal something of you, and that's the purpose beyond thought. Thought is kind of revealing yourself to yourself. Speech is revealing now to another. So God is creating, one would think, otherness, because He's communicating. So the first part of speech is, yes, that is what God is doing. He's creating worlds, this world. He's creating us. He's communicating through that act of creation. Furthermore, He's communicating in a very specific way His divine wisdom in the words of Torah. Right? So, yet, we might think erroneously that just like our speech, the breath comes out of my mouth, the word comes out, and therefore you got to be careful. You say something, you can't take it back. I mean, you could say you're sorry, but the word you can't take back, right? To the other individual. So God's speech, though, and His thought are completely united and absolutely one with Him. So let's understand that. What does that mean? As opposed to ours, it comes out, right? It leaves us. The breath actually leaves us, right? But not only the breath, but the impact of the word that we say, for good and for the opposite. But there is a point when the word doesn't leave us, all right, when it's in our thought, and even more so when it's in our heart or in our mind, right? Because remember, that's the source of any form of communication, is hopefully a mindful thought that we had. But that itself, that communication to ourselves, or that language, came from our heart, came from our intelligence. How is that word there? Absolutely unified with its source. Completely unified in my, right, that word that will eventually emerge, it's there within my intelligence, it's there within my heart's desire, but it's not there in any language form, in any language, letters. Word begins in thought and then in speech. So when it is there in my heart and my brain, it's there completely nullified to its state. So that's the metaphor that we need to use over here to understand from God's perspective. This is precisely God's speech. Although in one hand, it's like human speech. It is in order to reveal, yet his speech and thought are absolutely united with his essence, even after he speaks it. After he speaks it, it's as if it's still bound up in one with him. Right? In other words, there's no change at all. No distinction at all. God revealing and creating the world does not have any effect upon him in any change. Because it's that word is still part of him. Just as the word is part of us in our emotional and intellect before it emerges into thought and speech. Right? Now, that's from God's perspective. And here begins the cognitive dissonance, is the beginning of where it is from our perspective, the created being, that we receive that life force, that word from God, right, that comes out of concealment into revelation, right? Well, it's the greatest possible change that there can be, because we come from non-existence to existence. So how does that occur exactly? Well, it occurs by a gradual descent of the divine light and numerous contractions, tzimtzum, upon that divine light, that it decreases in such a way that the divine life we get from God is so reduced that it doesn't obliterate us, so to speak, that we would lose our identity, lose our being, that the light is very much reduced. That's what happens. That gives us a sense, which we're going to go more into that in following classes to understand that more. A short class. So what do we have over here? From God's perspective, we are not separate from him. From our perspective, we are. Well, that's the beginning of cognitive dissonance, is right there. Cognitive dissonance means that there's like this mental discomfort with two conflicting realities that lead to two conflicting values and perspectives. And as humans, we seek consistency. So this is the beginning. We can see how it's emerging. That there's God's perspective and our perspective. And ultimately where we're going with this is that great gap, right, in the Word of God as he speaks it from his perspective and our perspective, that gap should be ultimately closed. Yeah, that's it.